the other 99.99999% of businesses globally are not doing that.
I'm going, time out, Kimosabi.
You say, hey, you know how when you watch the Super Bowl, I did that.
Get to it fast. Right here on the Anycast. Make it strong, make it last. Right here on the Anycast.
All right, everybody, welcome to another episode of the Anycast. I am Matt, and I am here. We were just talking before we started with somebody that has been in this industry longer than me, or as long as me, which should make one or both of us feel very old. But Vince Taisipic is here today to talk all things CDN streaming and who knows what else. Vince, thank you for joining.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Absolutely. So, for those who don't know, give us 2 minutes of who you are and how did we get to this location in the space-time continuum.
Wow. I got my feet wet in what I'll call content delivery back, seems long ago, early 2000s, around 2000, I don't know, 5-ish or so, with a company called Kentucky. They were a peer-to-peer company. And we did a lot of work in the UK with the major media providers out there. And they used our technology. Anyway, Kentucky got acquired by VeriSign, and at that point, we were going to build a hybrid CDN, both traditional CDN servers with peer-to-peer mixed in. That lasted for a little while. Then I jumped ship and ended up over at Level 3 just as they were building out their CDN technology, and been with them for quite a while before they shut down their operations. So here we are. My background with content delivery, it's not so much the content delivery I've been involved with, it's more where it's been used. Media broadcast, file object delivery, whole website delivery, especially on the e-commerce side. So there's my background.
Amazing. Well, that gives us a whole lot of jumping off points. But the one that I would love to start with, because I feel like it is, at least in my social media LinkedIn universe, it always comes up every 2.5 years or so. Is 2026 the year that P2P finally takes over for CDN?
You know what? I wrote a white paper that I posted out there because of my background with P2P, not just through Kentucky, but because over at Level 3 or CenturyLink at the time, we acquired a peer-to-peer company called StreamRoot.
Mm-hmm.
And because of who we are, who we were, we had access to all the major media accounts that are out there. But the quick answer to your question is it's difficult. The arguments behind it, the data behind it that demonstrates its efficiency, where it can help with content delivery is basically undeniable. And it has been proven in some major live events. But there's a stigma, and that stigma will just not go away. That stigma is backed by, back then when there was the BitTorrents of the world, the Pirate Bays of the world, the Kazas and stuff like that. There were government policies, rules, and regulations that were passed by them that effectively outlawed them. And if you look at even how the Motion Picture Association feels about peer-to-peer, to this day, they take a very different view.
Yeah.
Again, the technology is undeniable, but there's that stigma that's hard to overcome. And like I said, we brought StreamRoot to a number of major broadcast logos, and it was hard ice to crack, if you will, because of that stigma.
Yeah.
And also because of the economies of where, pricing with CDN was going. People felt we're fine.
Right.
If you want a prime example of where peer-to-peer was tried a few years ago, you can go into Google, type in Twitch, and type in South Korea.
Mm-hmm.
Because the cost of operating a network or CDN in South Korea is so phenomenally high, peer-to-peer made sense.
Sure.
And Twitch tried, but were effectively chased out of the country, if you will. So,
yeah.
To your question, is 2026 the year? I don't want to say yes, and I don't want to say no. I've talked to the CEOs of all the major peer-to-peers out there. We talked about the challenges in the past, the challenges today. and what's tough to overcome. I suggested that with DPIN, you look at repositioning under that guise, if you will, right? Because a DPIN is all about decentralized processing, decentralized infrastructure, which is what peer-to-peer is. But it's that stigma that's hard to get away from.
Yeah, like the stigma is, I mean, part of it to me, the stigma, which is why I was, a bit of a leading question. The stigma to me is also like, at this point, it's okay. Something has to be wrong with it if we're in 2026. It's 20 years after you were at Kentucky, and still there's no traction, right? So even I'm with you. I don't know that it's a technology problem. If I go back in my Wayback Machine, it was maybe a math problem earlier on when so many people's home internet connections were like asynchronous speeds, and or were closer to the throughput you needed for whatever object it was, right? Like the closer you were to having an 8 megabit upload limit, trying to deliver an 8 megabit stream was, not exactly amazing math. Whereas today, hey, if you've got 100 megs up, 200 megs up, even though that's not a lot compared to probably what your downstream is, you can still feed 10 streams off it, depending on the bit rate. So, the math is better today, certainly from the network standpoint. But what I always observed in conversations with our customers, and it's not even in the context, I don't think, of P2P. I think it just comes up in general with delivery, because I see the same problem with like CDN Federation, and like, is 2026 the year of Telco Federation? Same thing, right? Like, is 2026 the year of multicast? What ends up happening, I think, on the commercial side is what vendors really want is not better technology. What vendors really want is accountability.
Yeah.
And it's really hard for me, if I put myself in I'm selling P2P, which we never have, but like we've talked about partnering with people, and we have, to your point, to do some events. It's really hard for me to be like, don't worry, Jim's computer in Ohio will deliver this for you. And they go, what if there's a problem with Jim's computer in Ohio? And it's like, well, there's stuff in the technology and blah, blah. All the end user hears is like, I've lost control.
Mm-hmm.
Right? I'm gonna have a quality problem, and there's literally nobody I can blame other than like, oh, that's just, it's in the cloud. It's in the client cloud, and hey, it mostly worked. And to me, that was what always, I think, scared buyers away, was just this lack of like, you can't, like, how do I get a root cause analysis on what happened on Jim's computer in Ohio?
Yeah.
That seemed to be a scary part for people.
That's part of it. The other part is the cultural side of the user themselves. Back when Kentucky was implementing P2P in Europe, people were paying for upload. They didn't have a lot of unlimited internet services at the home, so people were having to pay for upload. So what you had people's devices delivering up. Somebody was paying for it. Guess who that was? So there was that controversy that was going on. As well as others. People felt that, oh, well, you're intruding on my personal device. Also, technically, today's peer-to-peer is not what yesterday's peer-to-peer was. It's not a file sharing application. It's truly an extension of the CDN edge. It is that. It's just a smaller extension, but localized behind the last mile network, which is important. But peer-to-peer back then, like the Kazas, the BitTorrents of the world, they were big apps. You had to install an app, and some of them even required operating levels of service that had to be installed on the operating system on the devices. Well, that's not the case anymore. Now it's a plugin to a video player, or hopefully a download manager. And the other thing that peer-to-peer really does overcome in my point of view is, when you look at my definition of open cache, is a technology on the last mile that will accept content from anybody. I don't care who the CDN is. I don't care who the origin is, but it sits there, and open cache will accept content from anybody and deliver it accordingly.
Yeah.
Well, that's not what open cache truly is today. If you're using an open cache technology, that that technology has to accept it from its same technology into intermediate servers, if you will. So it's like Akamai can only accept Akamai content from Akamai servers and so forth, right?
Yep.
Well, it's the same with some open cache technologies, but peer-to-peer overcame that. So it kind of adds credence to what open cache is intended to be.
Yeah.
So even though these technological challenges have been overcome, it just goes back to that stigma.
Yeah.
And, with pricing going the way it is, again, like I said earlier, the content providers they're okay with what they have.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Obviously, pricing is a big part of
mhm.
both the CDN industry historically, as
Uh-huh.
well as kind of let's call it the current landscape in terms of who's exited the market, what buyers are looking for today. Where, in a traditional supply-demand curve economy, where is CDN? Is CDN close to the bottom? Is it close to extinct? Is it close to, resurgence? What do you think the market actually looks like today?
I think there's always going to be a need for delivery. I always, in the early days and to this day, for people who don't know what CDN is at a higher or a deeper level, I always tell people, think of it as the UPS or FedEx of the internet. Just look at it that way.
Yep.
Like FedEx loads their vans and their planes to deliver product. CDNs are handed electronic assets and it's delivered. You're always going to need that delivery. But what form of delivery does that take? Is it going to be the traditional sense of the CDN? How many purebred bred CDNs out there can continue to support the capex costs and maybe some netx costs if they're not getting settlement free peering from some of the networks out there? So the costs are going up while the economy, while pricing is going down. There's a bit of an imbalance there. So is CDN going to continue its traditional state? There's going to be some semblance of that. You have folks that are going to be out there that are going to want their own private CDN, but again, in what form? So is a virtualized CDN the next evolution? And we just brought up peer-to-peer. Well, peer-to-peer is a virtualized CDN, really, if you think about it that way. So, is CDN traditional sense dead? Not yet. I think it's going to be around for a while because you're still going to need that infrastructure, especially with the massive content that continues to grow out there. But what form does it need to evolve to? I've always argued CDN was the first distributed platform put out there decades ago, right? It did, but that distributed cloud platform, if you will, did two things: cache and delivery. Well, maybe what's going around is what comes around goes around. So is CDN going to be an infrastructure in the future, or is it going to be a cloud function, which is what it really is, right?
Yeah.
But, there are challenges out there of people looking at a virtualized CDN running in the cloud or the edge because of the costs associated with cloud, especially egress. But even that landscape is changing. There are platform providers that are out there that says if you use our virtual services versus our bare metal services,
Yeah.
to a degree, we'll give you free egress. So
Right.
there are those vendors out there that might make it possible. The challenge is that a lot of CDN technologies out there are, I'll use the term carefully, monolithic, right? It requires heavy duty hardware to run on today.
Yeah.
So to run in the cloud, you need to bring that down. You almost need to re-architect to say, how can we run this in the cloud? Now, I'll tell you one thing. It's been done. We did it. We actually ran CDN in a small production state in a general cloud that was out there. So it can be done. So is that the next natural evolution for it? Because a virtual CDN to me opens up a lot of possibilities. People who want to have their own private CDN with its virtualized, that's great. For CDN service providers that want to mitigate their costs and look at that direction, do we put X amount of terabits per second in this country, or does the business outlook for this country or this geography support just running virtually on somebody's cloud in there? So we'll see where that goes. So there's going to be the traditional, and there's going to be the virtual that'll evolve. But you brought up peer-to-peer. We talked about open cache. You brought up, multicast. A lot of these proven technologies have fallen into this black hole of being great technology that nobody wants.
Yeah.
Open cache,
I mean-
multicast, peer-to-peer,
I mean, I don't think that's unique to CDN though, right? Like if the premise
Yeah.
is like the best technology always wins, then
Yeah.
almost every large public company should be dead. Right?
Exactly.
So, adoption isn't necessarily driven by, call it VHS versus beta in 2025, right?
Hello.
Yeah. But having said that, it is, I think, a space now somewhat ripe for innovation, whether in the form of people rolling their own privates or virtual. Just because, something I remember when I started CacheFly circa, 2002, one of the things that I guess I'll say inspired, it sounds sort of annoying, but one of the things that inspired me to build it is like, on the face of it, I have a problem when the only vendor or solution to a problem is like giant, huge corporations. And at the time, it was like, so hold on, CDN is basically Akamai, and they're in the process of suing Speedera, and so they're either going to put them out of business or buy them. And there's, Mirror Image is kind of there, and like it was a very, early stage thing. But like the ultimate premise was like, if you want CDN, you need to buy from Akamai. And at the time, it was $2,000 to print an invoice at Akamai. Like, if you weren't spending $10,000, then nobody could even pick up your phone call. And on the face of that, I was like, I just find that offensive. And underneath that, it's something we talk about internally is like, I think small teams with really good technology can make a bigger difference than who's got the most CapEx to throw at this problem, let's say, or who's got the most programming bodies to throw at this problem. And as I looked through the evolution of CDN, it was like there was a lot of cool startups and people disrupting the space. There was Panther Express, there was Kentucky, there was all these people. Early on there was Edgecast, and then I look around in 2026, and it's like, oh, so I can buy CDN from a $2 billion company, or a $10 billion company, or a $100 billion company, or a $1.5 trillion company, and it's like, is that really the only ways to solve the problem or the best ways to solve the problem? So I don't know what it looks like, but I see innovation coming just because this isn't a problem. Notwithstanding, we'll get into the CapEx conversation, but like this isn't a problem that can only be solved by throwing 50 billion at it, 100 billion at it, 200 billion at it. It can be solved by what we're talking about, right? If you can get a market for better technology, you don't need to have $1 trillion to build a CDN. You don't need to be Google or Microsoft or Amazon to build something better for a given set of customers. Maybe you need to be that big to build a CDN that's quote unquote great for everybody, unquote, if there's such a thing. Right? But to solve somebody's business problem, I don't think it's like step one, have $1 trillion. Step two, solve the problem.
No. And one of the challenges, that people don't realize with CDNs is that for the most part, it is a generalized platform that handles any type of delivery. There's three types. There's media and streaming, media broadcast, whatever you want to call it. There's what I call file delivery, software updates, games, things like that. And the third one is what we call whole site website delivery. Right. But each one of them have different requirements, technical requirements. But when you have a generalized platform that caters to all, it's not the greatest of things, if you will. And the other side to that is when people talk CDN, it's media broadcast. That's where the money is. No, I'm sorry. Coming from a CDN background, media broadcast was 45% of our revenue. The other 45%, and steady state revenue was with object delivery, right? And then I'll throw the other 10%, with whole site delivery. But I always looked at Cloudflare as like really good at the enterprise delivery, the whole site delivery. They're built on that, and which is great because they do a really good job catering to small, medium businesses out there that need that type of delivery. But when you have technical contention with, on a Tuesday, Wednesday when patches are going out while there's a live popular event, That's a contention and cost on the infrastructure. Is there an argument to have a media broadcast CDN, a object delivery CDN, or a whole site? There's an argument, but it's not cheap, and that's where the CapEx comes in, right? So,
Sure. And again, going into the Wayback Machine, there used to, Edgecast started with like, we have large object delivery and we have small object delivery, and they're
yeah,
different footprints because one is optimized, at the time it was like basically spinning disk or SSD. And it was like, well, it would be cost prohibitive to put media that we don't need SSD IOPS on SSD.
yes,
I think the real challenge if you're looking at building a CDN, whatever that means, right? Whether you built one 20 years ago and you're maintaining it, or you're building one next month, really happens, to your point, when it's for general use.
yeah,
Right? Like, I look at, Netflix and Intel, or Varnish and Intel and Netflix putting out white papers on like, look at the throughput we can get through this FreeBSD kernel. And I'm like, yeah, but try that with my workload.
mhm,
Right? Like, it's different when you control everything end to end, and the standard deviation of your object size is not very big, and your use case is very specific.
yeah,
It and so in terms of the CapEx, part of it, it's funny. I don't think of CDN as a CapEx game today, unless you're talking about live event broadcast.
true,
If you get rid of live event broadcast, I think CDN was much more of a CapEx game, and not even CapEx / logistics, in like 2005, right? Like, if to borrow a term, the moat of CDN in a pre-cloud world was like, do you know how hard it is to like get infrastructure and stuff spun up in 70 locations, 100 locations? Like, that takes time and effort and knowledge, and certainly in 2008. Today I go, oh, you need 70 location CDN? Okay, give me your credit card and give me about 45 minutes.
hmm
And I'll get that spun up for you. Now, can that credit card version support the Super Bowl? Probably not. Can that credit card version support distributing this podcast? It probably can. So originally, infrastructure problem, CapEx problem, how do you get all the stuff to wherever? Today,
hmm
virtual CDN, I like your term. I can build your virtual CDN for this podcast by the end of the episode.
hmm
How's it going to perform? Is it going to be better than the alternative? That's like the hard part becomes, and you have to care, right? Step one is like, it has to be something like, I don't care how fast, candidly, everybody, I don't care how fast this podcast downloads, because I'm not really monetizing it.
hmm
This is not the business. Having said that, if it was the business, I care a lot about how it downloads. And now I'm in the position of like, okay, I can get some sort of SLA, or at least expected SLA, quality assurance, history of performance from a commercial CDN, or I roll my own 70 locations. I got my credit card, and now Comcast has a fiber cut on the East Coast. Me, as the guy with the credit card who rolled out 70 locations with the credit card, now what do I do? It's like, under ideal conditions, everything's great. I think today the practically hard part about running a CDN is operating it in unideal conditions, because getting to the pop count part is easy. The hard part is making things work when nature would like it not to work. Whether nature is a backhoe, or a Fortnite release, or whatever. Do you have, whether that's yourself, your team, whatever thing is owning this virtual CDN, do you have the expertise to manage a global network? Because that's what you have to do at that point, assuming you need it to perform.
right, right, and you know, you brought up, you alluded to the fact, what happens when something goes wrong, right? That's why when you look at movements toward a federated CDN, and whoever's providing that federated CDN provides a layer above or below, however you want to look at it, that manages across that, yes, that gives you a semblance of a redundancy, if you will, and failover, because hopefully their technology, if it uses AI especially, will know, what to do when it needs to do it, failover because of these conditions or whatever the rules are. The challenge is that here's what I'm seeing a lot of. posts about multi-CDN, right? That's your answer, right? Federated CDN is that, only it's one vendor managing that for the customer. But this everybody posting about multi-CDN, it's a great solution, but it's only available to a handful of people, because to implement a multi-CDN, you have to be a Fortune 500 or maybe a Fortune 250 company to be able to do that. It requires business resources. It requires technical engineering resources. It requires operational resources to integrate from a business and technical and operational standpoint with those. And then you have to manage all those vendors, right? A lot of organizations that need the safety, the redundancy that a multi-CDN gives you don't have access to, because they don't have the resources, including financial resources, to be able to do that, right?
And
So,
candidly, like what we see too is, like, if you buy multi-CDN for call that availability or redundancy,
uh-huh.
your first 12 months you're going to be less available, less redundant, right? Like, it is not I bought the magic bullet and then I deployed it. There's so much that goes into that orchestration and having it work well.
Right. And orchestration is a great example, and it's not, it's not implementing multi-CDN and looking at it just for a technical redundancy sake, to make sure that the continuity of your service, that your content is constantly flowing, right? It's not just that anymore. The multi-CDN also needs to have a business aspect to it. Which CDN provides me the cheapest rates in this geography during this time? That's another way to look at it. Could I put in a rule that says, am I meeting, if I have a minimum commit, am I meeting that minimum commit? Or if not, do I need to start shifting traffic to be able to do that, right? So have some of these business rules that need to apply. But most multi-CDN technologies today is purely about the technology,
Somebody recently said, which I like, multi-CDN is basically an insurance policy.
Yeah.
And I'm like, right, but it's an insurance policy that kind of has a pretty high premium, and the deductible is pretty high when you need the insurance. Like, I have never had a multi-CDN customer say the phrase to me, "Oh yeah, that big incident that happened, we didn't even notice." Like, I've never heard, like, the on the sales side, it's like, "Oh yeah, once we have multi-CDN, things can just go wrong and then everything will self-heal and everybody will be great." In practice, multi-CDN buyers have, maybe to your point, because of the resourcing, almost more stringent SLAs and expectations of what they want out of a CDN, and that's ignoring the fact that all you're doing is shifting your single point of failure from your large multi-continent footprint CDN to your not quite as large footprint, not quite as long track record, not quite as bulletproof infrastructure multi-CDN provider. And, today, if I look at the big two, if it's like, who I want powering my live events? Citrix and IBM.
Yeah,
Like,
exactly.
That's a recipe that's where I want the single points of failures to be. And it's like, I don't know.
Yeah. Well, you brought up a point earlier about, what happens when a fiber cut happens in this location. Services go down. When I know of more than a couple of instances where a content provider was using upwards of 4 different CDNs, actually 5. And in one case, a particular metro city went down completely. And what wasn't taken into account was these same CDNs, these 3 CDNs I was operating for this content provider, happened to be using the same network. When that fiber got cut, guess what? All the CDNs went down, and that's another factor I try to consult people on when you're looking at that from a capacity and a service continuity standpoint. It's not so much how much. Let's talk about capacity for a moment. It's not so much how much CDN capacity there is. You can put out all kinds of. It's what the network can support. Yeah, along with that, right? And the same thing about redundancy. If you're using the same CDN in a major metro like a Tokyo or Chicago or New York, but you haven't looked at what networks they're using for primary and redundancy, you may be putting yourself at the same risk of using one CDN in this case. So people tend to overlook that.
We talked about the cycle and what's old is new and what new is old, and one cycle has already run its course, and I wonder if it's not about to start the next wave. So I was an Akamai customer in 1998, 99, and the pitch of Akamai in 1998, 99 was, we're going to bypass all of those obnoxious and terrible peering relationships. Those are icky and gross, and we're going to put everything around. We're going to go around everybody's peering. Fast forward to 2015, and Akamai is just like, we deploy as much CapEx we can into Equinix and peer with everybody and cross-connect into everybody because peering is great. We love having centralized CDN nodes, and we peer with people because peering is great. And now we're in 2026, and it's like, well, we need to put stuff behind the peering because, peering is evil and icky and gross, and it's congested. And what we really want is deployments, on-prem with telcos. So like that cycle, I think, is now in the second wave of we need to avoid peering. I think
I think part of that is where and how much of that is settlement-free peering versus how much of that is transit they're paying for.
Right. Well, I mean, in 1998 and 99, peering meant free peering over an IX that generally just operated at 10 to 30% packet loss 24/7. Right. So what changed in the middle was that you had PNIs, and you could get uncongested connectivity to those eyeball networks in a carrier-free. Was when Equinix finally got traction, that's when the CDN business went from, hey, let's build lots of distributed POPs, back to no, let's build into data centers, and then that also happened to come along with a move to a ton of new DWDM capacity, as well as the move from 10 to 100 gig. So it was like, oh, and the carriers aren't bottlenecked here yet, but now I actually have access to Comcast, and Comcast has 16 circuit by 8 DWDM, which are all at 100 gigs. We're never going to run out of this capacity. 10 years later, it's like, oh my God, it's impossible for carriers to have enough capacity into colo. So like that cycle I see happening. The cycle I didn't see happening was like in early on Limelight days. So my answer was always, how'd you start CacheFly? I'm like, well, I really just stole the idea. So I got pitched as being, I would have been a low single-digit employee at Limelight. And at the time, Limelight just wanted to build a network. The founders had come off selling their previous business, Global Crossing. Non-compete ran out. Hey, let's build another network. And it's still my favorite phrase of all time. And they were like, we're going to build a CDN, but CDN is just the new cross-connect.
Okay.
And I was like, I think CDN's the new CDN. And they were like, nope, it's just a way to get bits on the network. Like, there's no value in having a CDN. It's just an easy way for us to get bits. I was like, I really think you probably want to be a CDN. Nope, we're like, it's just we're going to sell transit. And one of the ways we're going to sell transit is by caching people's stuff. I was like, okay, disagree. Went and did my thing. But as part of that, that original network build was like, we're actually going to rely on our backbone to get stuff from A to B. And which at the time was the super antithesis to Akamai, right? No backbones, no peering points. We donut around anything that sounds like network infrastructure. And Limelight was like, no, we're going to build a backbone. And for 15, 20 years, they were the only CDN that had one. And it seemed crazy still. And when I look at what our roadmap looks like for the next 5 years-ish, our customers' actual biggest pain point, whether it's live, whether it's VOD, whether it's anything, is getting content from A to B inside the CDN, and or from origin to inside the CDN. And you look, Amazon then ended up building a backbone for theirs, and so it's that one I think is now that cycle. It was a very short cycle because Limelight was the only one who did it. But like, I think the next 5 years, the story is just cache miss performance. Like, I don't think it's really interesting of like who, notwithstanding the availability risks that we talked about, I don't think it's really interesting of like who can serve the fastest 500 kilobyte object from RAM in a data center that's directly connected to the same eyeball networks fastest. It's like, what happens when somebody requests something that's not in RAM?
Mm-hmm.
That is like the actual story of how customers cancel streaming providers, or how you lose a revenue or a subscriber, a revenue customer, is you make it painful for them to watch something.
Right.
And like this Super Bowl is not going to be painful, other than like the glitch, right? But like, hey, this thing that nobody's watched in your region for a week and a half. Those are the things that, like, that 99th percentile QoE, that's what drags.
Yeah. You brought up, Limelight building on top of their own backbone. That's one of the advantages that Level 3 had when they started building their CDN, was they were a global network, and our CDN was built on that backbone. So you brought up Akamai back in the late 1990s, early 2000s, that says, we're going to build a CDN gets around all the peers. Well, guess what? We were built on a global network backbone that we were able to take advantage of the peering relationships that we had, including with a lot of last mile networks, right? So we had that advantage going for us.
And some of them you got to build twice.
Yeah, and the other side to that too, you bet your Global Crossing, that was one of the acquisitions that Level 3 made, which was another network that we were able to leverage. But the big truth of the matter is, when you have telecommunications that acquire or merge with other telecommunication organizations, the integration is not that clean. It is a bunch of cross connects. You treat each one of those acquisitions still as a separate network. So you still have those challenges. But yet, marketing wise, you were still able to claim it's our backbone network we're built on top of. The other side of the story is, people think the closer you are to an edge, the quicker you're going to get the content. I'm going to have to call, that half true. Okay. Because I could have a CDNet server 2 blocks away from me, which, by the way, it's more like a half a mile away from me down the road here in Denver. But if I get content that's cached on that server, that's not going to come directly to me, because network connectivity is not a straight line, right? So chances are, when I make a request that's going to get content out of the server a few blocks away from me, it's going to traverse miles and miles of network indirectly before it gets to me. And people don't realize it. And a great example of that is, I go watch the Denver game here at the stadium, which is down the street from me. But when I bring it up on my iPhone, and I'm watching the broadcast on my iPhone to what I'm watching on the live, what's happening on the field, there's a 2-second delay still. Even within the stadium, right? And a lot of that has to do with network connectivity. How much network do those bits have to traverse before it gets to the destination it needs to get to? Which is why I challenge what can be achieved with low latency, not just because of the network, but because even in that supply chain, ad inserts, encoding, transcoding, with all that stuff going on, what can actually be achieved from a low latency, quick delivery standpoint?
Well, the other way I like to think is, there's lies, damn lies, and CDN statistics. And so, even the premise of what you said, right? Like, I'm near an edge location, therefore it will be faster. The base premise of a CDN is something along the lines of, we are going to cache your content. Maybe that was possibly true in 1998. Maybe,
yeah.
In practice, today, in order to cache a piece of content, one must first evict a piece of content. So every object that the CDN is quote unquote caching, first we're deleting something else, right? We are uncaching potentially your own content, potentially your competitor's content, which would be great, or potentially a third party's content. But as a premise, all CDNs cache nodes operate at 100% fullness. So CDNs are just as much in the business of not caching content as we are in caching content in any given moment. Right now, ideally, you want the ratios to look better than that, but in any given moment, if you're looking at ingesting stuff into the cache, you're talking about deleting. And that's just like the base level. And that was true in 2002, let's say, right? As soon as we started getting away from, started adding media, right? Like it was maybe true when everybody just had small website objects. Maybe it could all fit. But then go into, okay, and now what we're actually talking about is the benefits of going around the peering and building caches embedded in people's networks. Okay, so let's say I had 100 pop CDN. Now I have 220 pops with my embedded stuff. All that means is my cache hit ratio is going down. Right? Like there is, and then if I want to add cache, whatever that means, now for every terabyte of cache I would like to quote unquote add, all things being equal, I have to pay for 220 terabytes.
Exactly.
To add 1 terabyte.
Yeah.
Then let's talk about 8K content or the overall growth of file sizes. And the math is just not good for CDN's cache things. Right? It is what you said, right? It's a function for delivery. And one of the ways that function can and may work is by serving a file locally from cache. But that, I think, is like the unspoken, industry thing is like, well, if you think of Akamai, right? Like at their scale, or even CloudFront today at their scale, right? What we're talking about is like, oh, they just do 5 terabits per second of cache misses. That's a lot.
The job, I don't want to say it's the sole job, but one of the primary functions of a CDN is to deliver the content as quickly as possible, right? That doesn't necessarily mean it's going to come from next door. We have experienced in the past where it's been shown that we can deliver content from this server 100 miles away from these users faster than we can deliver it from this server just 10 miles away. Because for a number of reasons, network quality, what's cache, what's not cache, to your point, right? So the cacheability does not, local cacheability, unless it's in the last mile network, really, does not necessarily mean fast delivery per se. And one of the things that goes on behind the scenes that people are not about, you're right. There is so much content out there that the local edge caches and intermediate server caches are 100% full all the time. So when something popular comes along, there are rules that come into play about what how stale is that content that's the first, maybe the first to go. But there are those things that are happening behind the scenes because they have to happen.
Right. We know that. Like if you've operated a CDN, that's sort of not even interesting. It's so obvious that it's uninteresting. And yet when you talk to CDN buyers, only the most sophisticated have a mental model that's similar to that. Almost all of them actually have a mental model that's like, oh, you just cache my stuff and everything works great. And I think of that as, maybe good, maybe bad, right? Like fundamentally, the whole reason you're buying from a CDN is to insulate yourself and obfuscate those challenges from you. Or else you'd build your own virtual CDN and you'd want to be the one figuring out what's getting cached and why and that sort of thing. But what do you see as the hardest parts of being on the buy side of CDN? Like you talk to all these broadcast and file delivery companies all the time. Like there's a lot of challenges in running a CDN. I see a lot of challenges in buying a CDN because
absolutely.
They do operate a little bit like a black box. How do you see buyers navigating that?
Well, in today's atmosphere, the number one answer to that is reliability. if I go buy, and this includes, the Alchemy's of the world. If I go buy this CDN service from them, are they going to be here next year? That everybody I'm talking to asks that question, including the Alchemy's, because when people look at Alchemy's earnings reports that shows what that business looks, there are people who've even asked me, is Alchemy going to continue to invest in this business?
They don't want to be
Right.
a CDN.
Yeah.
They're a cloud compute company now.
Yeah. So the quick answer to your question today is, what are the buyer challenge? One right now is choosing a reliable service that's going to be, I don't care who you are. It's them being comfortable about choosing the right services and hoping they'll be around next year. Now, people have asked, how do you mitigate that, Vince? If I go buy, a CDN out there and they leave next year, what happens if I need to go find somebody else? And by the way, some of the ones I talked to, this would be their third time around because they've been divorced from, the ones that have closed down the last few years. One of the things I tell them is, look at how they've implemented some of their technologies. What standards are they using from SVTA or whatever? It makes it easier to make that shift. Have they participated in a multi-CDN strategy with other providers? Because if they have, chances are they've had to adopt some of those standards to make it easy to make that switch, right? So there are things like that are going on. But the number one answer to your question, what's difficult for buyers, is who do I choose? Right. And behind that, especially with what's happened with Cloudflare in the last, 2 months, how do I ensure some semblance of redundancies? What else could I do? And the first thing that they brought up was, we're going to do multi-CDN. I go, you can't. You're not big enough. How many engineers do you have? How many people do you have technically that even understands the operations of a CDN? Because guess what? You're going to have to do the triage. When something goes wrong, you're going to have to do the triaging because you got to figure out which CDN to call that's got the problem, right?
Yeah.
So number one, it's choosing the reliable CDN. Number two, it's getting the metrics that they need. That's, and there are companies out there like the Hydraulics of the world that's helping with that. Especially when you're using multiple CDNs. If you need to know what happened with a Game of Thrones or something like that, you got to pull all the logs from everybody and go, okay, this is what it looked like. But even with one CDN, it's some of the buyers out there are not cognizant. What they mostly see is metrics about how much have been delivered, where it's been delivered, what devices have been delivered to. But the other challenge, they want, the metrics of, hey, what did my viewership look like? How can I take those metrics and correlate that with other databases that says, here's what, from a marketing, sales, business standpoint, here's what these deliveries meant to me, right? Not just, here's how many gigabytes, here's how many terabits per second. That, as a marketer, that means nothing to me. What did the viewership look like for this genre or whatever that might be?
Yeah.
How many updates do I send to these platforms versus the other platforms? I need to start making decisions. Do I continue to support, this version of an operating system or not? These devices or not? So it's taking those metrics and making business sense out of it. Because I admit, I was guilty of this as well. When you go in and you pitch your wares, you show these great graphics, but it's all technical. It's targeted for network people, when who you really should be selling to, if you will, is the business side as well, not just the technical side, but the business side as well. So it's finding some of those metrics that are available, and unfortunately, in most cases, some CDNs say, well, we got this partner over here that you can get those metrics from. They're deeply integrated with us, and it's like, oh, great, now that's another vendor I got to go deal with.
Yeah.
Well,
so that one's a double-edged sword, because I've been I always want a partner for that, because I don't ever want to put ourselves and our brand in a situation where it's like, we're great, just ask us. And it's like, I like the idea of having third-party metrics that to like, don't just because I say something is true, you should not believe me, right? Like, let's have an independent panel review, what happened here. So like,
I agree.
And I get that. And on the flip side, there are people who obviously have internal analytics products too. But partnering on that, I get. I think what you're talking about is kind of top of mind to me. We had I had a sales training not that long ago, and I had to felt like I had to remind the team. I was like, just as a reminder, nobody's actual business is to buy CDN from us.
Right.
Like nobody is in business to do that. You have to tie whatever we're doing for them to their actual business, which is not we're in the business of buying CDN. And it's hard, right? Because you want to lean on your technical metrics and the cool technology you built and blah 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 blah. But if it doesn't help, it doesn't actually tell them how to decrease churn 0.8% in the next quarter.
Right.
It's meaningless above the food chain, right? Talking about the industry and people being worried about people being here. I think it's also hard because our snapshot of the industry snapshot of call it the market is just that procurement piece, right? So everybody we're talking to, CDN is 100% of their P&L ish. But when I look at the people who probably got burned by CDNs going out of business, it's like great news. We squeezed our CDNs down, and now 2.1% of subscriber revenue is going to CDNs instead of 2.2% of subscriber revenue.
Right.
And then in 6 months, it's like, oh, also the CDN went out of business. Crap. But that 0.1% of the overall business, man, that was a great 6 months.
Yeah.
I think there'll be a little bit of that. I think in the market, but also I think just people being a little more cognizant on the buy side. Like my joke a year ago, I wish it wasn't as true, was like, people are like, oh, what do you think of Disney and these streaming providers? I said, their business model is great. They take money from subscribers and they use it to bankrupt CDNs. It's a pretty good business model. Except for the fact that CDNs are the only way you touch your customer.
Right. There's a better way I wanted to say what I just said about, especially using partners, making it easy to do business with you, because you're right. People are not coming to you. You're not selling CDN, and people just don't want to buy CDNs anymore. They need to buy a more integrated solution, whether that's with, website image optimization, token authentication, things like that, cybersecurity, right? If they can come to you and buy as holistic a solution as they can get from you, they want to make that easy for them. They want to make it look like they're using one service from one provider.
Yes.
Now, granted, I agree. There's a lot of advantages to using third-party partners out there. But if you can make that seamless to the customer so they don't have to deal with any integrations, things like that, or having to call another 1-800 number. It's like, these numbers are wrong, but whose fault is it, right?
Right.
But, making it easy to do business with you, because like I said, they're looking for a solution for the most part these days. When you look at the Cloudflares of the world, how they cater to the enterprises, that's a great model, right?
Yeah. It's very sticky that way too, right? Like if like Cloudflare, the joke is, Akamai is a security company masquerading as a CDN. Cloudflare is a CDN masquerading as a cloud. And the challenge, I think, for the customer side, and we see it all the time, is like when people go through that procurement cycle now, they're really not buying CDN, right? So but their perception is that they are. Right. And I'll use the extreme examples of what's in Cloudflare's product portfolio today. But, somebody calls 1-800 CDN and is like, hi, I'm interested in, moving or at least exploring the possibility to move a CDN. I'm on Cloudflare today. I'm a CDN buyer, and we use a lot of CDN today. So can you tell me about what your stablecoin is? What do you mean you don't have a stablecoin? I thought you were a CDN. Oh, okay. Well, tell me, how do I get mobile phone SIMs for you to replace all the SIMs in my people's devices? What? You're a CDN. What do you mean you don't sell mobile phone SIMs? Cloudflare sells me mobile phone SIMs. Okay, well, how are you going to man in the middle my SSH sessions so I can, get into all my servers? What do you mean you don't man in the middle my SSH things. You're a CDN. I thought that's what CDNs do. And then, and even that is Cloudflare has that problem when people try and move from Amazon, right? Of like, what do you like? I'm using you to replace what I get from Amazon. What do you mean you don't do? You don't have an AI compute platform like Bedrock that I can do my AI work on. So it's like this expansive definition. And then to your point, what the conversation looks like, oh, well, we can handle the CDN piece. You just need to bring in these 17 other partners to cover off these sort of edge casey things that aren't really CDN, but you are getting from your vendor today. And in the end, that procurement person goes, I'm not going to go get 18 new vendors to replace one.
Mm-hmm.
What are you talking about? So,
well, when StackPath closed their shop, when Lumen closed their shop, when Edgio closed their, you saw these posts from all the other CDNs like, okay, you just lost your CDN, come on over to us. We can provide you everything you need. And I saw this coming. I saw it coming. I go, it's not that easy. Salespeople just saw dollar signs and they thought, we're going to go get that business. No.
Yeah.
Why was it difficult? Because it was that one customization StackPath, Lumen, or Edgio did that you don't support today. Or it's the vendors that they used with StackPath, Lumen, or Edgio that you don't partner with today. And that happened in more cases. I've been on numerous calls where that came into play, making that transition impossible. It's like your core CDN business could make all this money if not for that one customization, if not for that one partnership, right? And people overlook that.
I think the one thing that hurts the industry overall is the premise that people have conflated two concepts and merged them into one thing, which is one is that CDN has gotten cheaper year over year, which it certainly has.
Mm-hmm.
People have turned that into this, like the commoditization of CDN.
Right.
And the definition of a commodity is not something that gets cheaper every year. The definition of a commodity is something that's interchangeable. And the challenge with commoditizing CDN, or the premise that CDN has been commoditized, is exactly what you said, right? Which is, oh, hey, you're a customer. Okay, this is a commodity. Great. I can save you 10%. So you're going to move tomorrow?
Yeah.
If it's a commodity, you should move tomorrow. No work required, and you'll save 10%. Easy peasy.
I was on an analyst call, and we were talking about the commercials going on, the economics going on in the CDN industry. And it was last year, actually. It was during a holiday shopping season. And, there were a few on this analyst call. There happened to also be some e-commerce folks, a couple of big ones, as a matter of fact. And the cost of CDN came up. And, I said, okay, all of us on this call, let's do a mathematical exercise right now. What's the total number of visitors you expect to your website, and on average, how many pages do you think they're going to go to before when they start buying things? Okay, we got those numbers. Okay, let's use an average of 5 megabytes of 10 megabytes of payload. Let's make it nice round. So you're going to have all these customers coming to your website, and they're going to result in this much traffic overall. Huge amount of traffic. Okay. You also need DDoS, you need WAF, you need bot management, you need some other ancillary services. Great. Let's apply today's market rate for CDN to this payload of traffic. And we're talking about tens of millions of visitors, right? And we were looking at maybe $30,000, effectively in CDN costs. I said, you know what? I would negotiate for $0 CDN and pay more for cybersecurity, because that's probably the most important thing in shopping, is protecting your business and protecting your customers, right? But the point is that the commercials, the economics of CDN for this particular segment has gotten to the point where you can almost give away. I mean, throughout the year, you're not going to get millions of visitors to your website. It's going to be, your CDN cost is going to be in the, the 7,000s, the 5,000 range per month.
Yeah, and I think that's an interesting slice of the market, right? Like in your breakdown, it was 10, 45, 45.
Mm-hmm.
That 10 they don't really push that much more traffic than they did 10 years ago, right?
No.
Like what's offset on the other, two categories is that sure, unit economics are going down, but the volume is going way, way up. But there's like a e-commerce page from 10 years ago versus today isn't that much bigger. So where does the uplift in revenue come from? If you're talking about the unit price going down, and the answer is it doesn't / it can't, right? It can only get, the total spend can only get cheaper for e-commerce, as opposed to the total spend for say file delivery and streaming in theory should be going up and up and up, even if the unit economics are going down and down and down. So that's like a tough market segment, but I would say even for the streaming segment, like I say it jokingly, but it's not really a joke. Like if you look at why those big failures happen in CDN, there were structural business issues, right? Like
Yes.
You have to do a lot of things different if you just happen to have 500 million in debt on your books, which let's say both Edgeo and StackPath had. But fundamentally, it was them chasing revenue and that got them kind of behind the eight ball. But even that revenue they were chasing, right? Like, say your average Disney, or I don't want to throw Disney in there, your average streaming service customer consumes a terabyte a month of streaming. I mean, their cost per terabyte is 40 cents, 45 cents, right? They're paying 45 cents a subscriber for a busy one,
Right.
while charging whatever it is, $19.99.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So like even in the world where we're talking about the big streamers who are pushing all the bandwidth, it's like it's a rounding error in their P&L every quarter. And sort of to my previous point though, but it's somebody's whole P&L, and that person needs to save 10% or 15% or 20%. But like is that market actually in a healthier place because they're paying 45 cents a subscriber for delivery instead of 55 cents a subscriber for delivery, but having 3 less providers to choose from?
Yeah. Yeah.
Like I feel like that's a market, a problem the market should have solved, but somehow like financial engineering on the back end of the businesses stopped it from happening.
Yeah, I was in a conversation with some old colleagues not too long ago, and like I said, 45%, media broadcast delivery, and the other 45% object delivery. And object delivery was the easiest technical delivery to service. It was the less costly thing to do, right? Because media broadcast had so many moving parts involved with it. Even within the CDN, with adaptive bit rates going on, things like that, people being able to scrub back on streams and look back on what happened 10 minutes ago, whatever that is. But it was like, bring me as much of the object delivery as you can, because that was steady state, it was reliable, and I will say that there's been some instances where it was more in revenue, really. People think that you're going to make all this money off of a live event, and there are some companies that focus their technology and services just on live event. I keep telling them that's only barely 5% of what media broadcast is for delivery. It's not a huge moneymaker per se.
But usually
it's not what I would.
To be fair,
Go ahead.
usually it's a gating thing though for people who have a mix, right? Like nobody's going to be like, I'm only going to give you my easy VOD, Mr. CDN. Don't worry, I'm not going to burden you with the hard live. I'll leave that to your competitors. Like everybody wants a better live in order to earn the VOD business. Yeah.
But object delivery did another thing for us. It allowed us to take advantage of the off-peak hours, right? And I would offer much, much cheaper rates for off-peak, because I've got servers and networks sitting there collecting dust for the most part. So I'd rather get something for it than nothing at all, except for, which is why I liked object delivery, except for Game of Thrones. Because that was an audience that did not want to be spoiled by social posts about what just happened in this latest release. People stayed up around the clock around the world to watch the latest release on a Sunday or Monday morning, right, in their part of the region. But that's what I liked about object delivery is it gave us financial economic alternatives, right? That media broadcast doesn't really give you, because media broadcast, you can rely on prime time hours and live events. After that, everything shuts down pretty much, regional. So,
And that circles back around to where we started, which is the CapEx part of it, right?
Mhm.
Which is the challenge is that your CapEx requirements are loosely around that 5% of revenue that you talked about, right? If you specifically
Yeah.
just said, what's my CapEx required to serve the off-peak object delivery and software updates, push content, the CapEx requirements are not that intensive. They're not nothing, but they're not that
Yeah.
intensive. The challenge is in how do I build for this peak, and that then puts pressure on the rest of the business to go, okay, well, now that we've spent the money to handle the peak, now what are we going to do, knowing that even if you get everybody's peak, it's all at the same time. So you can't do that. Like you can't. The problem isn't let's get more peak, right? The problem is what are we going to balance it off with?
Yeah. I mean, when you're a pure play CDN, it's easy to go get, your allowance from mom and dad, the chiefs up in the ivory tower, to say, okay, we need this many millions to expand regionally or geographically or capacity wise. And, people have asked me now about my competitors in the past, and I say, look, commercially, the Akamai's, the Fastly's, the cloud players, they were my competitors. But my real competitors was the other product portfolios in my company, because we were a telecommunication company, right? And so when we did our roadmaps, did our planning, what we wanted to do, my challenge was going and arguing for a chunk of that pie, which we didn't always get. So that was my competitors more more to the point, was being able to accommodate what specific customers were asking for, but needing the funding to be able to do that. And it is, in some battles we won, others we didn't win.
Sure.
But when you're a pure play CDN, you don't have that challenge. So
No, that the challenge is not where do we get, how do we split up the pie? I think the challenge is still, where is the smart place to invest the pie?
exactly.
Because the dumb places are plentiful and obvious, and sometimes you can't avoid all of the dumb spend. But that's a good leading question. So in 5 years from now, let's say, what does that put us into? 2030, coming into 2031. Is there such a thing as a pure play CDN?
I don't think so. It can't be. There really isn't today. Whether you're a traditional CDN infrastructure or where you're virtualized CDN running as a cloud function, you are a part of a supply chain that requires all these other features, all these other capabilities: transcoding, encoding, web optimization, image optimization, all of it. With ad inserts, without that, CDNs just have to sit there and wait for content to be delivered. All those other things have to happen in that supply chain. So, is there a pure play CDN down the road? I think there is a CDN function as part of this. It goes back to that virtualization, the cloudification of, if you will, CDN. It is more a function of a supply chain.
Mm-hmm.
How that operates, where that operates, do CDNs re-architect to run in a general cloud? Do CDN infrastructure, traditional infrastructure, start to accommodate, at the edge or in intermediate servers, like, even in your origin shield, we'll do the transcoding, we'll do the encoding, we'll do the ad insert, we'll do all these other functions that you, broadcaster, are running elsewhere in somebody else's cloud, right? How that molds out, one of these two have to happen, or maybe both are going to happen. But, I've always argued, CDN provider, you want to repurpose your investment in all that hardware? There's a lot of powerful compute you have. You've got to be able to do more than just cache and deliver. You have to. Right?
Yeah.
So, now, down the road, what I'm starting to see is, especially with this argument between Mach and WebRTC, is I'm starting to see more interactive bi-directional content delivery, especially with gaming, right? I saw this in South America. I saw this cool video player from a major broadcaster down there that had, 75% of the video player was the screen where you're watching a soccer game. Off to the right side, there was the social interaction, whether you were tapped into Twitter or Facebook or whatever, you could link in your social app. Over here was another interaction where people could type in, show me the stats on this player on this team. And down at the bottom was just ads being streamed. But there was a lot of bi-directional engagement going on. And that's, CDNs are unidirectional for today, right? So what protocols, what technologies, what's that going to look like? Because we are quickly moving, if we already haven't moved, to more of a collaborative interaction. I've been saying for years, games are no longer an application built by developers, engineers in a black box. Games use the same movie making technologies with high definition cameras. We did some ad inserts for some gaming companies, streaming games to end users, right? Things like that. My point is games are a never-ending movie.
Right.
What changes next depends on what your actions were. What trinkets did you pick up? What did you shoot down? It's a never-ending movie. And so, but that never-ending movie has a collaborative interaction with other players, other participants. And I'm seeing that more and more these days where, our movie's going to be like that video player I saw for soccer games, where people are going to watch the movie, especially a Game of Thrones culture, where they want to interact with each other one-on-one. But the way they did that back in the days was they brought up a separate Twitter app or a separate Instagram app, whatever that, or a Facebook, app, and they were all collaborating. But now I'm starting to see that merge more and more these days. But what is technology going to look like? Do we call it CDN or an evolution of a CDN? What is all this going to look like down the road?
Yeah. Yeah, like I think of your UPS FedEx example and or analogy, and I think there's parallels there, right? Like they can't do a whole lot until the package is on the loading dock.
Well, yeah. And I did an analogy in one of my write-ups to say, look, when Amazon came out, they used other CDNs. They used UPS and they used FedEx. And they also used U.S. Postal Service as their CDNs. Okay, they did that, but they started to realize they were delivering so much, they built their own private CDN, their own air fleet, their own van. So they're using commercial CDNs plus their own private CDN. And then I started looking at, well, now they started moving into this peer-to-peer realm where they realized that, wow, they're not enough. We're going to contract with other local delivery providers, even specific individuals that use their own personal cars to deliver, right?
Yep.
That to me is a great analogy of delivery, of how Amazon has evolved over the years, using all these different services, technologies, if you will. And that's, you asked earlier, do you see peer-to-peer happening? Maybe it is an evolution. It'll probably not say peer-to-peer. It's more like DPIN or something like that. But, something has to happen. It has to happen. So,
yeah, I think like and now Amex is using Amazon's using drones.
Yes.
But I think there's actually something real there in that analogy. And what I think is real there goes back to something that you mentioned when we were talking about multi-CDN and stuff like that, which is like, yes, the largest e-commerce company in the whole world can build their own air fleet and partner with people for local delivery, but like the other 99.999999999% of businesses globally are not doing that because they're not resourced to. It would be such a distraction and move away from their core business to go like, let's build our own courier service. Amazon just had the scale where they could go do it, and it's not a distraction to the rest of the business. And I think, with And that's a CapEx conversation. That's an OpEx conversation. With
Well,
CDN,
exactly.
the barrier for that is a little bit lower, right? Because technology and everything we talked about already. But like, I think we already kind of have seen that with Netflix,
Mhm.
right? Like, I would say that if you want to draw the analogies, like the two biggest, right, the biggest e-commerce platform in the world and the biggest streaming platform in the world both said, you know what? I can't afford, either financially or from a customer service standpoint or whatever, to outsource my package delivery and let the success of my brand rely on UPS and FedEx.
Mhm.
And both of them then went ahead and built something that arguably is better, certainly for their businesses, than UPS and FedEx.
Mhm.
The question is, who else is better at delivery logistics than UPS and FedEx? And I think the answer is not that many people. But how do you get closer to what those people have? Like, I always think that what Netflix built, and maybe I should ask you, like, at a high level, what do you think the real genesis of them saying, you know what, we are not going to rely on any third-party CDNs, we're going to build this in-house was? What was the end game / tipping point for them to make that decision?
I'm going to preface this by saying it's just speculation.
Sure.
What I'm about to say. And the other side to that story is, um, I work with a lot of the guys that build Open Connect. They came from Get Where, level 3, who, guess what, are the grandfathers. I consider kind of the forefathers of CDN, coming from Digital Island, and that's who those folks were at the beginning,
Yep.
right? But why did they go that route? Because they could. They had the financial backing.
Mm-hmm.
They had technical expertise. They chose to go down that route. Now, the other side, and we see what's going on with WBD, and who knows what's going to happen there, right? So
Yep.
much is being said about that. But might they push themselves into a situation, if that happens, WBD happens, do they have an infrastructure that can support that, or do they need to start looking at, do they become an Amazon Prime of video, that they have to do what Amazon did for physical product delivery and look at other service? Who knows? Maybe, maybe not, right? But they have the technical expertise.
Yeah.
They had the backing. That's the other important part. They had the executive backing to go out and build this bloody thing.
Yeah.
And the
But
financial work.
I think that backing, again, speculation, maybe informed speculation. But I would say even today, like, I talk to a lot of people and they're like, oh, they did it to save money. And I'm like, I guarantee they spend more than it would cost them to procure commercially. I don't think that this was hey, we would like to save money by doing it ourselves. I think it was, hey, we want to exert a level of control over the user experience that we're unable to go get in the marketplace.
That's key.
Yeah.
That's key.
And so to me, when I look at that, I go, okay, so for the people, so there's like your two, big companies that can go just say, do that, right? I want to control the way everybody in North America receives a package. Okay, there's one shopping platform that can, or maybe Walmart could do it too. Could go like solve that problem. Similarly, Netflix was mostly because they were early, but they were the one that could solve that problem. I think for everybody else, that's what they want, right? Is the ability of control that end to end, to control that experience. But if they could, I don't think they would prefer to do it by becoming a UPS FedEx, right? I think what they would want is better control of the UPS FedEx experience. And so I think that, like, both for the current framing and the next 5 years, that's what I think CDNs need to do. That's what we focus on, is like, how do we make it so that it feels like it's yours?
There's speculation, with a lot of posts out there, that once this WBD Netflix thing happens, Netflix is going to move all the content that's being streamed from WBD over to their Open Connect. I'm going, time out, Kimosabi.
Yeah.
There are contracts that WBD had with other service providers that doesn't end overnight, right? So,
not only that, like, go back to the conversation we had, right?
Yeah.
Which is the Open Connect platform. There are some efficiencies in the architecture that are predicated on all the content needing to be delivered a certain way, and et cetera. And so in a transition period where you can Netflixify, if you will, or open connectify the WBD experience, then sure, maybe. But in the meantime, like the conversation we had about hardware, I can tell you that if Netflix is getting 600 gigabits per second out of a box today, and they just drop the WBD workflow onto it, they will no longer be getting 600 gigabits per second out of a box. Then they become the problem that we talked about of having to do a commercial CDN, right? Which is, well, now there's this type of manifest, there's this type of file size, there's this, there's that, it caches differently. And so the efficiencies they gain by controlling every aspect of like, what is the object going to be, where are we going to get it from, how is the client going to request it? If you just eliminate all of those and are just like, oh yeah, it's just, any HTTP request Warner Brothers makes will just serve. Today, I think, the Open Connect isn't Open Connect anymore. Now it's something else. So I think there's, even if you get past the economics of it all and the contracts and just say, you know what, we're sunsetting this, it's still a technical problem.
It is.
Of either A, making the whole thing look like Netflix from a technology standpoint, or B, making Netflix Open Connect look like something that can support things that don't look like Netflix. And either one of those is a challenge. I know which one's easier. But like that's the other part. And then the missing part, like if you're seeing the same post that I'm seeing, which I assume you are, it's people talking about, 7% of the CDN market going away or something like that. Which is fine, other than it starts from the premise that when there is consolidation, no new competition is created. And I don't know that that's true. I don't know if it's just like, oh, now that Warner Brothers is now part of Netflix, there's no new opportunities for anybody else to be a new CDN, potential buyer that wouldn't have existed if that acquisition wouldn't have happened. If it is so gargantuan and is such a big impact on the ecosystem, then surely there's opportunities created by the vacuum.
Yeah. To me, there's always that balance of nature. Right? Yeah. It's just going to happen. Going back just a few minutes ago, when you talk about, owning the experience, I agree 100% that that's what I see Netflix has evolved to, is being able to own that total end-to-end experience. Now, whether they had that vision back when they built Open Connect, I don't know. Right. But how that decision was made got them to this point, got them to be able to go after the WBDs and who knows whatever else they go after in the future, not in this country, but other countries, right? Yeah. Because they are global, right?
And even their transition to live events, right? That was not like, oh, let's just drop in a standard workflow, right? And adjust everything, on the CDN to support a standard workflow. It was like, no, what does the Netflix Open Connect version of Live look like, and how would you build that? And then that's what they can build. And I'm sure you feel the same as me, which is, oh, if I could just tell my customers what content I would choose to accept or reject from them, in terms of architecture and caching, my life would be so much better. Right? But Netflix has that, and similarly, Amazon has that. In terms of Prime, right? It's one component of it is they replaced FedEx and UPS, but the hidden component of it is, and the whole thing revolves around one customer, right? They didn't build a FedEx UPS replacement that says, sorry, Amazon.com e-commerce, if your packages aren't on the loading dock by 4 p.m., we won't pick them up today. Or sorry, it needs to fit this, you need to put it in our packaging or else, right? Like they built something to accommodate the needs of one customer and control that end-to-end experience, which is like, they replaced UPS and FedEx, but they did not build UPS and FedEx. You can't call them and be like, I need a pickup. And so I think that's also the parallel that I think we'll see with like people building their own private CDNs is it's for control. It's for that end-to-end experience. And, if you've got the means and you've got the resources, you can do it. And if you can't, that's where, if you can't, that's where innovation happens, right?
Well,
Either
yeah.
inside your business or on the CDN side, or a combination in between. But like I see that as the opportunity.
The analytics and the metrics alone from
Right.
all this, especially after WBD, is like that's a wealth that just other major broadcasters, whether you're Fox, BBC, Sky, who name it, that's a wealth of information from a broad spectrum audience
Mm-hmm.
globally that people would die for. So, and there's speculation. Oh, they're going to dump all the games and not nobody knows what's in Netflix's mind. I don't. I have to believe not even they fully know yet what they wanted, what an end result might look like, because there probably isn't an end result. It's just going to evolve to something else. So whether they keep games or not, who knows, right? They may want to go back into that business because maybe WBD has some practices that are evolved over what Netflix didn't have in that space. Who knows?
Yeah,
But,
and I mean, I think the thing that I consistently hear from customers as well is what everybody in that space is aware of is they're in an attention economy.
mm-hmm.
And like when I talk to a gaming customer, they don't think their competition is another gaming customer. They think their competition is Netflix and YouTube. Because it's, they're looking for load times that look like it needs to load as fast as a YouTube video. Why? Because otherwise my customer is going to go do that instead, because they immediately get that experience of getting to do something. So, I think that's an analysis Netflix will have too, right? Is like, is there something here we can use to capture more attention so that we don't lose it to insert other game that they don't own or control here?
Yeah. I mean, I posed a question about what's the future? Do movie theaters, does that industry have a future? Because what's happening here in Denver, I'm seeing theaters being demolished, physically demolished. Now, there's a new theater being built that's more interactive. That's got, nice heated seats, lounge chairs and things like that, offers cocktails. But it's only one theater being built outside of Denver. But, and the other premise to that is it's just bloody expensive to go watch a movie these days. That not just the ticket price, just the beverages alone, the snacks, right? Families I talk to say, Vince, we don't go to theaters anymore because I got 2 kids, and even going, it's just not economical. I mean, they're fine with their Disney subscription and whatever they get kid channels over OTT that they subscribe to, but. Is Netflix the new? Is Netflix going to change that? Are they the new? Who knows? Maybe. Right?
Yeah. If you ask somebody with kids, do you want to entertain them? Would you rather do it in the comfort of your own home, or would you rather have to go out in public, make sure they behave, get from the car to the concession stand, into the theater, make sure they don't disrupt anybody else while the movie's going on? It's
after spending $75.
Yes, and $75 for the privilege. It's not the glamorous experience that either it once was or maybe never was. It was just that was the option.
Yeah. Now it's changed. It's not just the Netflix thing. It's how the whole industry. I mean, we're talking CDN, and look at a majority of our this conversation has been around media broadcast, right? So
it's the shiny
object.
It's the shiny and it's relatable, right? Like I think there's something about. It's like the tangible version of CDN. I don't think people really go, oh, it takes a lot of technology for me to get a Microsoft Windows update. And I don't think people tangibly go, oh yeah, the way I was able to execute the shopping cart purchase was because of the low latency experience that yada, yada, yada. And I also think we're still in the window where we're just exiting the novelty period of this, and we've exited it, but like it wasn't that long ago that the expectation was if you pressed play on something on your TV was like, I hope it works at least 50% of the time and doesn't buffer. And now it's like, oh my god, it buffered, I'm canceling. And that was like a really short time frame, right? Like in 2009, right? You were not like, I'm going to build a business that's built around people streaming 1080p videos, and if they don't work, I don't have any money. Like that would not have been a great business model in 2009. I'm not sure it was super viable in 2015. And in 2026, not only is it viable, but people are giving huge multiples to acquire them.
Yeah.
So, the fact that the technology made it possible, I just think people are still the current generation of consumers is part of that. So that's why it's interesting, because everybody gets it, that it was a problem to solve. My kids are not going to like, oh my God, thank God somebody solved the streaming problem.
Mm-hmm.
Right? They're just like, you press play, things go. I don't know the difference between cable or satellite or OTT. Like, I want moving pictures.
Like
I get moving pictures.
It's like wildfire. You're going to expect it.
Yes. Yeah. It's expectation. And literally less than 10 years ago, it was more novelty. It was like, I sure hope this works. And if it did work, it was like, honey, look,
Yeah.
the weird Roku that I found on the thing, I plugged it in and I configured it. And it only took me 2.5 hours to get it set up. And now look, there's a streaming moving. Hold on, it buffered. That's what it was not that long ago. So I think that's the fact that it's still in transition is what makes it interesting. I don't think we'll be talking about it the same way in 5 years. There'll be another thing. Like, look, how are CDNs going to deliver holograms? The hologram industry is going to be 15% of the bandwidth delivered or whatever, right? Like, there'll be an evolution into this is a solved problem and it's just not that interesting anymore. I think just today it's not a solved problem, and so it is still interesting.
Yeah, you're right. It media broadcast, what goes with it is all the glitz and glamour. None of that is with object delivery. As a product manager, I looked at that as like, whether we win this live event or get this OTT deal or not, whatever that might be, I can always count on this other 45% to help with the business.
But you can't tell your neighbors what you do in the same way as when you say, hey, you know how when you watch the Super Bowl, I did that. Right.
Yeah.
And that's the connecting piece, right? Is everything else is kind of behind the scenes, whereas this is, I think, front and center for people. Vince, this has been great. Thank you for your time and your thoughtfulness. It's always fun talking shop. Love to do more of it soon.
Yeah, definitely. Hopefully we'll run into each other at some event somewhere. So it'd be great.
Absolutely.
This is different, another round, so much more to talk about. Gonna aim to satisfy with help from CacheFly. Get to it fast. Right here on the Anycast. Make it strong, make it last. Right here on the Anycast. The Anycast podcast, brought to you by CacheFly.